Today, my voice is a bit scratchy, but we're going to be talking about a video nevertheless. This one is by our good friend Jethro Bodine, who has a video called Two Types of Atheism, Dissecting Reality from Perception. Now, I have no idea what that means, but I guess we're going to find out here in a second, so let's do that.
I want to talk to you today about two types of deconversion. There are atheists that claim to be deconverted, and they might all think that they're in the same group.
Okay, two things. One, why does his tongue do that? It's very interesting, and now that I've pointed it out, if you didn't notice it before, you'll notice it now. Why does his tongue do that? Secondly, what about those of us who are atheists but didn't come from religious backgrounds or who were never religious to begin with? At this point in time in America, after 30 years of secularization, a majority of non-religious people also have non-religious backgrounds, most likely. If you were talking 20 or 30 years ago, it'd probably be the case that most people who are non-religious came from religious backgrounds, but America has changed. You, Jethro, are talking to the past.
And so that even expresses itself in some of the videos like, oh, I used to be a Christian and I deconverted. And this person, I used to be a Christian, I deconverted, etc. But actually, there are two types of deconversion that I want to go over with you. So the first type of deconversion were non-Christians, those who were never Christian to begin with. They had never put their faith in Jesus Christ, but had been brought along in some branch of faith. And it could have been a cultic branch of faith, or it might have been an actual branch of faith that had weak teachers and weak leaders in it.
Okay, first of all, no true Scotsman, and second of all, who are you to decide this stuff? If somebody says they were a believer, if they were, say they were a Christian, who are you to say, well, no, you weren't? Is it necessarily the case that someone has to have a transcendent conversion experience to be a Christian? I would think the answer should be no, because I don't think the early Christians would have had that. In fact, I don't think most Christians throughout history would have had that. But for some reason, of course, Protestants think the world revolves around them and their particular beliefs, which are very new. So I don't know. Would he think that? Would he think that it requires a transcendent experience to be a Christian? I don't think it does. I think if a person says, I believed it, hey, that's enough.
But as a non-Christian begins to mature into the ability to make their own decisions, as they start being able to think for themselves, these non-Christians found themselves in the stream of Christianity and are like, well, I'm not a Christian. Like, I'm looking around and I hear what they're teaching, but I don't know if I believe that.
Here's the thing, though. Most of the people you're talking about did in fact have transcendent conversion experiences. Most people who were trained up from a young age to be Christian did have those kinds of experiences, at least like in the fundamentalist evangelical camps where you usually find these kinds of stories. So you're just describing something that doesn't exist. Most people who consider themselves to be Christians have had transcendent conversion experiences. And of course, that includes most people who are now atheists that used to be Christians.
Because they were brought along in it, they think that they were Christian. This is not uncommon. For those that have some Christian ideology, some Christian background, etc., they have even worn the label and told people they are Christian, but they've never gone through a conversion experience. And so these people, as they begin to investigate, they begin to go into secular sources and find all kind of information that proves that the Bible is not true.
And why shouldn't you do that exactly? Should Christian sources be your only sources? Would you give the same advice to like a Hindu or a Muslim? I doubt it. I doubt it very heavily. I think that you'd probably tell them to find outside sources. Now, of course, he'd tell them read the Bible, but as long as they're looking outside of their religions, he'd probably be pretty happy with it. I mean, people like this, they're so skeptical of other people's religions, and they often appeal to secular sources in order to do so, to be skeptical. So why is it okay to do it about other religions, but your own it's bad for? Well, we're about to find out.
Of course, we know that Satan is the prince of the power of the air, and he has written volumes in an attempt to undermine Christianity. And so on the surface,
So there you have it, folks. Satan is real, and he is a writer. Now, I would have personally imagined he would be a lawyer or a politician or an engineer, but nope. Satan is a writer. Now, I would really like it if Jethro would tell us one book written by Satan, because I've always found it very suspicious that the Bible only gives the one side of the story. I'd like to hear the other side. But somehow I don't think Jethro's got that for us. I mean, he might say, well, the book on the origin of species is, in fact, written by Satan. We know this for a fact.
When you are not a Christian and you begin to skepticize Christianity around
Skepticize. I like that. I like that, Jethro. Skepticize. That's really cool. I start using that.
you, and you start looking for secular sources that Satan is going to provide, and you start seeing they're like on the surface.
So Satan is now a librarian too, apparently. Satan's just got like a full day ahead of him. I just imagine like Satan waking up in the morning, stretching like, oh, it's going to be a long one at the office today. We've got lots of sinning to do, my friends. And then he shows up to the library like, hello, would you like a library card today? Or hey, do you have your library card? We have a special offer for you today. Or, hey, we're doing a book giveaway. You know, just like, yeah, Satan is a librarian now. I think Emma Thorne would love this. She would love this video so much. If anybody out there knows Emma Thorne, tell her about this. Satan is a librarian.
It seems to disprove Christianity, and so those people deconverted. Actually, what they did is just left their religion behind, not their faith behind, and definitely not a relationship with Jesus Christ. So that's type A.
Hey, Jethro, we're friends. We're buddies, okay? You're my homie. So I got to tell you something. My friend. You know how you just described having a personal relationship with Jesus and having a faith? That's what religion is. You just described, you could have just said religion. They left their religion, but you didn't have to go into more detail. We know what religion is. You are a religious person. We know what that means.
Deconversions. Now, the type B deconversions, those are the ones that actually had a relationship with Jesus Christ. They were engaged in loving Jesus Christ. They knew Jesus as a intimate friend and as a spiritual being to some degree and to some level.
Let's talk about Dan Barker. Dan Barker, as many of you should know, leads the Freedom from Religion Foundation. He's in his 70s now. He's been leading it for a long time with his wife, Annie Laurie Gaylor, and she's really great too. I think I said her name right. If I didn't, I apologize. But they met on Oprah Winfrey, an episode about atheism in, the early 80s, mid 80s? Dan Barker was a fundamentalist, an evangelical. He believed he had a personal relationship with Jesus. He believed he knew God. He would pray and feel like he was in direct communication with the Lord or communion or whatever. And it was like that until he was about 35. His whole life up to that point, he'd been the guy that you didn't want to be sat next to on a bus, because if you were, you'd be hearing about the Lord all the way to your destination, whether you wanted to or not. He was a popular preacher. He was a traveling evangelist. His whole life was about faith in Jesus, but he was also a really skeptical person. And he started learning about other religions to understand why his was correct, essentially. And eventually that skeptical eye, as he describes it, turned on his own religion, and he discovered that what he was describing, this relationship with Jesus, was just feelings, and other religions describe the same thing about their figures. A Muslim will describe that they have a personal relationship with the law. Hindus with Shiva or Vishnu or whatever. They'll all describe the same thing. I always point to it. There's an excellent documentary on YouTube, about 13 minutes long, called Spiritual Witnesses. It describes people converting from one religion to another, sometimes even to cults, and they all describe the same feelings and the same everything. It's a quite revealing documentary if you've never thought too much about what people believe, why they believe it, and how they got there, which a lot of Christians have not. So, I think the key point here is just this. Dan Barker, he wrote a book called Godless. By the way, I recommend everybody should read it. Dan Barker would describe his experiences similar to what Jethro here has described, except he would not describe them as having been real, but all happening in his head psychologically, as emotional experiences, not as real experiences. I mean, Jethro, You cannot, with your personal relationship, go to Jesus and tell me something I didn't know about Jesus previously from the life of Jesus that later ends up confirmed. You couldn't do that. When I say I have a personal relationship with my dad, what I mean is I can go ask him a question, talk to him, and he'll give me an answer. Let's say that somebody doesn't believe that I know my dad, but they know my dad. Let's say that they were friends a long time ago, and they ask me to ask him something that only he and his friend would know. So I do. I go to my dad and I ask him for something only the two of them would know. My dad tells me. I go back to the friend. I tell the friend. The friend is like, wow, you really must know him. Christians can't do this with Jesus. I mean, atheists, as he has pointed out, I believe, ask all the time. So if you have a personal relationship with Jesus and you think I should become a Christian, all you've got to do is use your personal relationship with Jesus, ask him what I need to hear to know he is real and convert. And of course, they'll never do this. That evidentiary standard for this personal relationship is apparently too high.
They might have been in church, or they might not have been in church. It's probably they were in church, but they were walking with the Lord in some capacity, but they now have deconverted, and Hebrews.
They thought they were walking with the Lord before realizing it was just emotional experiences. Let's not muddy the waters here, my friend. These things are not real.
Is very clear that that type of deconversion, you walk away from the relationship and you have severed something that can never be rebuilt or reestablished.
Okay, so let's talk about Dan Barker again. Dan Barker says to this day, in his old age, he can actually get into like his prayer position. He can get into like a meditative, prayerful state and feel the same feelings he used to, be in communion with God and Jesus, even though he doesn't even believe in them. How is this so? This would imply that the once saved, always saved is an actual thing. He was saved, therefore he is saved. He can still have communion with God, even though he doesn't even believe in God. Or it's as he thinks it is, and it's all in his head, which would imply it's all in your head too, wouldn't it?
Now, the difference between the two is that the type A deconverted Christian, or deconverted Christian as well, or deconverted atheist, they wear both monikers. So
don't get confused, buddy. Don't confuse yourself, Jethro. Stay on point here. You can do this.
So that deconverted person can actually, upon hearing deep truth and good explanations, they can feel the Holy Spirit draw them back towards Christianity, towards an enlightened Christianity, instead of a fluff or a highly abusive Christianity or a cultic Christianity, because obviously Christianity.
When you look from the outside in, you see that there really isn't a difference between these various groups he's like subdividing this into. My mom really doesn't like Mormons or Southern Baptists or Catholics. She's herself a Free Will Baptist for some reason. I don't even know what that means, and I don't really care. But she just doesn't like the Southern Baptists or the Catholics or the Mormons. She thinks Mormonism is a cult, and of course I am inclined to agree with her on this point. But the mistake she makes is thinking that Free Will Baptists are so different than Mormons. No, when you are outside of both looking in, they both look very similar. Ever played the game Red Dead Redemption 2? At one point, there's this guy from Colm O'Driscoll's gang, and he's taking you to try to kill Colm O'Driscoll, who's a bad guy. And on the way there, he tells your gang members a hard truth to take, which is, you two look the same to me. Your gangs look the same to me. Dutch's gang has a very intellectual justification for why they do what they do, but ultimately they're no different than the other gang that is just about robbing and killing. So I think looking from the outside in is indeed very advantageous. A lot of Christians wonder, a lot of fundamentalists wonder why Mormons don't become Christians and go straight to atheism upon deconstructing, and it's because once you've been skeptical of your own religion, it's hard to see any other as being that much more legitimate. Not to say impossible, but it's certainly hard. And very rarely do people leave Christianity, like for real, and become atheists and then go back? I've heard very, very few stories where I think that's the case.
Is so broad it has muddied water, and you can see how some people don't want to drink
I washed my hands in muddy waters. Anybody know that song? Stonewall Jackson, isn't it? I bet he'd know that song.
from it because of their exposure to it. But the one that has deconverted from Christ, in my experience with those that I know, they become very nasty type creatures. They become very
Creatures. Congratulations, all people who deconverted. You are now creatures. What kind of creatures? I don't know. Pick your own creature. What kind of creature do you want to be?
repulsive and rebellious towards Christianity. That they actually are vicious and vigorous, and they are black holes of loathing. I mean, it's just awful.
You are making them sound really cool, I gotta say, Jethro. That's the first thing. I got two things to say once more. The second thing is, have you ever taken a look in the mirror while talking about people that you don't like? Because I hate to tell you, since we are good friends, the faces you just made were very nasty indeed. And I think that if you looked in the mirror when talking about people like this in these ways, calling them loathsome and such, I think that you would find the same things in yourself.
And I'm sorry I got lost there in my description of these, but as I was thinking about those types, there is some kind of spiritual mechanism in them that just vanishes, and it leaves no goodness behind.
How do you know that? People who convert to Christianity, I've never seen one person convert to Christianity and end up a better person. There's not been one time in my own personal life that I've seen somebody convert to Christianity and thought, wow, they became so much better. They always become a lot more bigoted towards everybody. They always become homophobic, transphobic, even if they weren't. They usually become anti-abortion. They usually start to become really misogynistic. They become really right-wing. They start to hate immigrants, refugees, Muslims, you name it. They don't like it anymore. And I think that right there is the real telling thing. When people deconvert from Christianity and become atheists, in my experience, they often become much better people. Look at the ex-Mormons, for an example of that. Of course, he doesn't think Mormons are really Christians. He thinks they're a cult, but I think they're both Christians and a cult. But that's the most common ones I run into lately. But I have met a lot of people who used to be like really hardcore religious people and deconverted and became much better people. Of course, he doesn't think so, because he thinks like if you get an abortion, you may as well be Satan himself, most likely. But that's his bias there.
These are
I mean, geez, think about like the whole like Donald Trump thing. Donald Trump's supporters are the majority of evangelicals. Like that's his base. The majority of evangelicals, like 90% of evangelicals are his base. Donald Trump is one of the most hateful figures in American politics ever. I think the only person to really outdo him recently has been Nixon, with his, big list of people he didn't like, and talking about how bad the Jews were constantly, and just assorted bigotries with Nixon. And I think like you really have to be not looking to miss just how angry and bigoted and like violent-minded Donald Trump actually is. The fact that most evangelicals support him, it's not a good sign for your case that Christianity makes people better. If they support somebody like that, yeah.
those whose conscience is broken and destroyed, where they are no longer going to function by what they know is good and right or wholesome.
And yet, atheists are underrepresented in prisons, and Christians are somewhat overrepresented in prisons. That implies that if you have a religion like Christianity, you can do almost anything and feel good at the end of the day because Jesus will forgive you. For an atheist, the only person that can really forgive us in the end is ourselves. And to get our own forgiveness, we must pledge to be better. The Christian doesn't have to do that. He can just give it all up to God, which may explain why there's so many more Christians than atheists in prison. I mean, atheists are what, like 4% of the U.S. population? Really, probably more like 20, but on statistics, as far as statistics go, like 4% of the population. And the number of atheists in prison is much lower than like 1%. That implies like you're wrong. That's just because there'd be more atheists in prison if becoming an atheist really made somebody that malignant.
But it's just broken, and they will actually put on airs, and they have no problem stating that they do have a conscience, or I know the difference between right and wrong. And they put on this, maybe this face, but something has drastically and darkly changed within them.
I wonder who he's trying to convince exactly. Is Jethro trying to convince us, or other Christians, or himself? Who is Jethro making these videos for? That's very unclear to me when I watch these videos. All I know is these videos are a real slog to get through. I like responding to videos. I do it for a living now, apparently. And so I like doing it. But responding to Jethro is actually very difficult. Because I don't know who he's talking to, or for what purpose.
And that's the type 2 deconverted atheist. So there's a big difference between the two. And so if you are an atheist that has deconverted, maybe you can tell the difference. Maybe even some of you will share on here that, yeah, you used to be a Christian, but you weren't, and you did have a relationship with Christ and you left that. We do have examples of that. I know, I think it was Lee Strobel did a video several years ago, and the evangelist that was traveling with Billy Graham, he went through this. And one of the things he says at the end of the video, he said, yeah, I miss Jesus. And what he was talking about is the concept of Jesus, because he doesn't actually believe in Jesus anymore.
If you can understand that, then what's the whole point of that rant about type 2 deconversion and all that? Very scientific approach here, but like, why would any atheist want to comment agreeing with your two types of deconverted atheists? Like, why would they want to agree with you on anything? You have described both type 1 and type 2 atheists as being like terrible people. So just type 2 or worse. Why would anybody want to agree with you on this? I disagree categorically with everything you've said, so I disagree.
But he missed everything that was beautiful and enlightening about it because it is real.
No, it's because fantasy can indeed be very nice to live. I mean, I know some people who have psychotic delusions, and some of them are very happy. Most of them are not. Most of them are very upset about it. But some of them are very happy with their delusions. That doesn't make it better. I mean, these people, Christians, they think that Muslims and Jews and Hindus and Zoroastrians and whoever else are all delusional. They believe in delusions, lies from the pits of hell, as it were. They that's what they think about these other people. But these other people are pretty happy in their delusions. So yes, I understand how somebody could deconvert and then be like, yes, I miss the happiness that came from the delusion. But sometimes reality is more important than just being deluded, you know?
But if you're a type A deconverted atheist, there is still hope. There is still the drawing power of Christ that can bring you to him. And also stick.
Okay, just for the record, he did say that also about the type 2 atheist. He did say that first he said it was hopeless, basically. Then he said, but sometimes they feel the drawing of the Holy Spirit back to the faith. So he's essentially like refuting himself as he goes. Or, if I want to be completely fair, maybe he's just not explaining himself very well because he's new at this. And if so, that's fine. But maybe you should script your videos and check for these sorts of contradictions, maybe, I guess. Try your best, my guy. Boy, am I hungover today.
This for Christians so that you will know the difference between the two. Because if you find yourself in an extended, long argument with a type B deconverted atheist, you are wasting your breath. The best thing you can do with them is say, hey, I'm sorry about your luck. I'm sorry about the stance you have taken. Enjoy your life. I'll enjoy mine.
I think the scariest type of atheist for Jethro to meet should be a me type of atheist. I wasn't given a type, so I'm just going to call it a me type atheist, a storm type atheist. We should be the scariest ones of all because we never shared in any delusions about anything. But very often we know the most about religion, and many of us do religion for a living, ironically. I think we're the ones to really be scared of. Forget type 2 bitterness or type 1 apathy. What you should really be worried about is type me knowledge, because we will mess you up. But for the rest of you, thanks for coming, thanks for being here, and I hope you have a great one at the Library with Satan.